What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we are fixing the Temur Precon because it needs help. But before we do that, let's click on our whatnot link in the description down below. You'll get a free $15 whenever you sign up and it helps out the channel. Another thing you can get is 20% off all of your Tolarian library proxies whenever you use code DT for D. But let's talk about why I think the Temur Precon is broken and why I say, hey, it needs fixing. The way I see it, you have two choices here. You can have a 3 CMC commander that's going to draw you a card whenever a 4 power creature enters the battlefield, and then whenever a 6 power creature enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each opponent equal to your power. Very cool here. There's going to be a lot of fun builds arounds with this commander. I just don't think it's this deck. So let's look at the other commander. The other commander, 7 CMC, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you look at the top 8 cards and you put a dragon from them into play. That seems like what this deck wants to do, especially with how many dragons there are. The reason that it's broken, and I don't think it's going to work, is 1, the card advantage is all the way down to 6 or 7 if we include the face commander. Additionally, the ramp is just not what it needs to be. There is plenty of ramp cards. There's like 14 ramp cards, but they're one-off ramp cards. So this is your Cultivates, your Kodama's Reaches, and your cost reducers. We're not talking about your Savalas that add consistently 8 mana per turn. This means the play pattern is going to be play your commander, play 1 dragon per turn, draw a card, deal damage. That's just going to be way too slow for what we need this deck to do to compete with other decks. So we're going to fix that today. The first thing we're going to do is swap out this face commander for the chonky dragon that cheats more dragons into play. Now we're getting double the amount of dragons because we can hard cast them as well as cheat them into play with our commander. To do this, we want to add some cards that allow us to play our commander a lot faster, like Thran Dynamo, Gilded Lotus, and Warren Power Stone. These are very explosive ramp cards that guarantee that we're going to be able to cast our 7C commander a lot sooner. I mean, look at Gilded Lotus. That's going to enable us to add 3 mana along with Thran Dynamo, right? So these two, if we cast them turn 4 or turn 5, that means we're going to untap and almost always have access to 7 mana to then cast our commander, as long as we've been hitting our land drops. Warren Power Stone's a little bit worse, but we still like it here. Unexpected Windfall and Big Score do something kind of similar. For 4 CMC, we're generating 2 treasure tokens, and we're discarding the cards that are too expensive for us to cast right now, while drawing more cards. So we get card advantage, we get a little bit of ramp that helps us get to our 7 CMC commander, and we get to discard the cards that we're really not going to cast this game. Faithless Looting is also going to be super solid here. This is going to filter out those super expensive dragons out of our hand in the early game to get us into our land drops. Dragon Speaker Shaman should have been in the Precon. This is going to reduce all of our dragon spells by 2. That's going to be pretty massive, especially when we're trying to cast multiple dragons per turn. There's also dragons that allow us to cast more dragons, like Savage Ventmaw. This guy attacks and boom, you get to add 6 mana to your mana pool. I'm also a big fan of Ganax here. This guy just gives us a treasure token whenever we cast a dragon spell. That kind of reduces all of your dragons by 1 mana in a roundabout way. Windfall is also a super helpful card here. Again, in the early game, when we get trapped with a bunch of dragons in our hand, we're just going to want to discard them to draw into more helpful cards like our ramp spells. That way we can easily cast our commander. This will turn your starting hand, that's 3 lands and then a bunch of 8 drops, into a keepable hand as long as you have Windfall in there. Balefire Dragon is a little bit more on the pricey side for $7, but whenever this guy deals combat damage to a player, he's going to deal that much damage to each creature that player controls. This guy's an effective board wipe that keeps all of your opponent's creatures off the board. Dragon Mage is going to be a wheel on a dragon, constantly drawing us into more cards. We are playing Drakuseth as well. This guy can be very effective at just keeping the board clear of any problematic creatures. I also like the idea that we can play Incinerator of the Guilty. We have a lot of high CMC cards in our graveyard that we either weren't able to cast or that our opponents have removed because we're playing big scary dragons. Now we can collect evidence on those cards and deal a ton of damage to our opponent's creatures, wiping their board out. Limrith Desert Doom, I like this guy as well. This is just going to be some solid card advantage on a giant dragon that's going to keep smacking our opponents in the face. Dragonhawk's Fate's Tempest. I want to read this guy. Whenever Dragonhawk enters the battlefield or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still in exile. Now, we are only realistically able to cast 1 dragon that we exile off of this guy's trigger because of how expensive our dragons are. But If we're exiling a lot of cards off of this guy's ability, that means we already have a very favorable board state. And then if we're only exiling 1 or 2 cards off of this guy's ability, that means we still have a board to create. So not only is he amazing if we don't have a big board, but if we do have a big board, we don't need to cast all the dragons we're exiling with him because we already have a board of dragons, and it's just going to help us burn down our opponents faster. Null Spine Dragon has the potential to draw us a ton of cards. Yes, we have to discard our hand, but even our commander's 7 power, so as long as we deal at least 7 damage to our opponent, we hardcast this guy, and then boom, we draw an entire new hand. Now this guy is kind of a non-bow with our commander because our commander triggers on attack, so no opponents have taken any damage that turn, but honestly, if he triggers off the commander, just put him at the bottom and pick a different dragon. Let's talk about some non-budget options, because honestly, there's some pretty cheap ones that you can pay an extra $5 for, and I think they take the deck to an insane new level, and there's some $40 cards that you really don't need, but are also just really cool in dragon decks, so let's get into it. The first one for $14, you have Myram Sentinel Worm. This guy is the Temur dragon commander, but honestly, if you add this guy to the deck, I think I would just rather him as the commander. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a token copy of that dragon, except it isn't legendary, so this guy just doubles up on all of your dragons, and it's kind of super broken. The one reason I would say to play this commander instead of Myram is just because this is a 7 mana commander that is not as scary as Myram, but can easily find Myram. So it lowers your threat level substantially. For around 20 bucks, you have Clouth Unrivaled Ancient. This guy adds mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool equal to the total power of attacking creatures. This is going to make it to where you can easily cast all of those dragons in your hand along with hell, all the other spells in your hand. He adds an insane amount of mana to your mana pool. Ancient Silver Dragon at $40 says you can roll a d20 whenever it deals combat damage and you get to draw that many cards. So insane card advantage on a dragon. Ancient Copper Dragon at an insane $80. This card is not worth it, but I did want to mention it. Is going to allow you to roll a d20 whenever it deals combat damage and add treasure tokens equal to the result. For around $45, you have Old Gnawbone. This guy's way more worth it than the $80 Ancient Copper Dragon we just talked about. He just says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to create that many treasure tokens. Insane. At $10, you can add Utvara Hellkite. This guy just creates a 6/6 dragon whenever a dragon you control attacks, so doubling your board state of dragons every single turn is pretty busted. At $16, you have Urza's Incubator, and this is going to reduce the cost of all of your dragon spells by 2. You could also include Animar for $7. This guy says whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to put a 1/1 counter on him, and then he says creature spells cost 1 less for each 1/1 counter on him. So he progressively just reduces the cost of all of your dragons until you're just paying the mana pips. That's going to do it for today's deck tech upgrade. Let me know if I missed any of your favorite dragons in the comment section down below. Shout out to my patrons, Irrelevant, Chicken Salad, Preator, The Professional Heal, and Excessum. You guys are amazing. I hope this helped everybody in their deck building endeavors. I will see you guys in the next one.